This video is brought to you by OddsJam. If you've never heard of arbitrage betting, think of it like the Rob Lowe of betting. You play both sides so that you come out on top. Every sportsbook has different odds, and through OddsJam's algorithm, they track the odds of every sportsbook up to the second to let you know which games to play so that you always come out on top and are guaranteed to make money. As an example, this Sunday, I went to the arbitrage calculator that OddsJam has and saw that over at Bet365, they have minus 125 odds on the Lions to score over 1.5 touchdowns in the first half. While at Hard Rock, they have plus 145 odds on the Lions to score under 1.5 touchdowns in the first half. OddsJam tells you exactly what to bet so that you are guaranteed to make money no matter what happens. Because either the Lions will score multiple touchdowns in the first half, or they won't. No matter what happens in the first half, whether the Lions put up 5 touchdowns or put up none, I am guaranteed to come out on top. It is that easy. And making it even easier is the fact that you don't even have to manually find these bets. OddsJam's tool makes everything one click away. And there are hundreds of bets like that every single day based on the sports books available in your area. If you know me, you know that I have a legal background, so I truly mean it when I say that with arbitrage betting and OddsJam's up to the second calculator, you literally cannot lose and always come out ahead. It's not betting so much as it is math. If you sign up now using my promo code JG9, not only do you get a 7-day free trial, and not only does it help the channel out a lot, but you get 25% off your first month. Link in the description down below. So sign up for OddsJam today, where the odds will be in your favor. I want to give you this hypothetical scenario. Suppose you're taking a driving test, and you're trying to get your driver's license. You're in the car with the instructor, and the test goes pretty poorly. You're going over the speed limit. When it comes time to parallel park, you end up hitting the curve. You do a rolling stop instead of coming to a complete stop, and at one point, when you turn so harshly that you can hear the tire squeal. Obviously, you fail the exam, and you're upset about this. And you say how poorly you did, saying, I couldn't parallel park. I messed up, I don't know what I was doing, and I drove horribly. However, in the middle of all that, without any hint of sarcasm whatsoever, and without any bit of dry humor, you say, I thought I should have passed. And I don't mean that you say that in the sense of, I absolutely should have passed, but I screwed up and I didn't. I mean that you genuinely thought that based on your performance, you should have passed the exam and gotten your license. Based on the way you drove, even though it was horrible by your own admission, the driving instructor should have given you a passing grade and allowed you to get your license as a result. Something like that would seem absolutely insane, right? You'd have to be borderline delusional to possibly think after a performance like the one you put on that you deserve to pass. Because I can promise you, at no point did the driving instructor ever think that you should have passed. However, while you shouldn't think that you passed, you should think about hitting that like button down below, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and hit 70,000 subscribers. Well, I bring that up because this man right here is Philadelphia Eagles head coach Mike McCormack. Honestly, as an executive, he was pretty good. When he was in a front office role in the 1980s with the Seattle Seahawks, he was able to build some solid Seattle teams and take the Seahawks from an expansion team that didn't do a whole lot into a perennial playoff contender that didn't have a single losing record in his 6 seasons as the full-time general manager. But as a coach, yeah, not so much. If you want the classic case of a guy who was good in the front office, but was bad as a coach, Mike McCormack might be the guy, because in his 5 seasons as the full-time head coach, his teams never had a winning record and went a combined 25, 48, and 1, winning just 34% of the time, or 1 out of every 3 games. And the writing was on the wall right away that McCormack might not be the guy, when in 1973, as the man in charge of the Philadelphia Eagles, he said something absolutely asinine following a game against the Atlanta Falcons that deserves a deep dive today, especially since the Eagles are playing the Falcons on Sunday if you're watching as of this video getting released. Because this is the story behind Mike McCormack and the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles who may have been a tad bit delusional. Before I talk about the actual comments in question, and just what the heck head coach Mike McCormack was thinking, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand, and how exactly this game went. It's November 11th, 1973. It's week 9 of the NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands over at Veterans Stadium between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons. For the Eagles, this season has not exactly gone according to plan, as 9 games into the campaign, they find themselves at 3-5-1, 2.5 games back of the Dallas Cowboys for the NFC East lead, and 2.5 games back of Washington and Atlanta for the lone wild card spot in the conference. Since back then, only 4 teams made it. Win this game, and you keep your season alive, and only find yourselves potentially being 1.5 out with 5 to go, which isn't great, but it is manageable. Lose this game, however, and your season is done. There's too much ground to make up, and you'd be eliminated from playoff contention, still yearning to make it back for another year for the first time since 1960. However, as you can probably tell, even though the Eagles needed to come out on the front foot and have a good game, that did not happen at all. Because when the final gun went off, it was the Falcons who not only won it on a cold day in Philly, but took it quite handily, winning it by a final score of 44-27, so it was a 3-possession contest. Very little, if anything, went right for the Eagles on this day, especially seeing as the Eagles never led at any point in the contest outside of 7-0 super early on and trailed at the halftime break. Atlanta had its way on the ground, running for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Philadelphia did not exactly do the greatest job at holding on to the football, losing the turnover battle as starting quarterback Roman Gabriel, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, threw 2 interceptions. Philly had no answers for Atlanta when it came to special teams, as the Eagles allowed Ray Brown to return 4 punts for 104 yards, averaging a whopping 26 yards per punt return. To give you an idea of how awful the Eagles were in that phase, Tom McNeil punted 5 times and had 207 yards punting. Ray Brown had 104 punt return yards. This meant that the Eagles averaged just 20.8 net yards per punt. At that point, you're better off just going for it every time, because the field is barely flipping. This was the most points that the Eagles allowed in a game all season, and especially after winning 2 straight to get back in the thick of things, this was a snap back to reality moment. Everything about this game for the Eagles was ugly with a capital U, as the Eagles lost ended their season prematurely, with nothing left to play for over the final 5 games of the season but pride. And after this game right here, McCormack was understandably upset, because every coach isn't going to be too thrilled after losing a game, especially by 3 possessions, and especially in the manner that it happened. Because afterwards, he spoke about how poorly his team played, and how the Eagles did not look even the slightest bit sharp. When I say that there are a ton of quotes about McCormack just ripping into his team's performance, and talking about how much better the Falcons were on this day, I mean it. He said, "Our tackling left a lot to be desired. We had our hands on people and didn't bring them down. Maybe we lacked aggressiveness. The pass rush wasn't good. We didn't hit the passer. Alright, so the defense was really bad. They were bad in the run game, they were bad in the pass game, they were really bad." He said on the play of the special teams unit, "We changed some people, moved some people in, and we're going to have to do it again. We're giving the special teams a bad rap. We're not that rich or deep in talent." I think that was what kept us in the hole all day. Okay, so aside from the defense being bad, the special teams unit was also pretty bad. He then added on the game, "It wasn't enjoyable. Our kicking game, overall, didn't help. We either had poor punts or a line drive punt they returned. The Falcons hustled. It was a physical game. They ran it down our throat. We couldn't stop the running game. There was not much good tackling. They just drove us backwards." And to sum up the loss, McCormack said, quite bluntly, "We had people on the ground all day long. What happened was we just got the hell kicked out of us." Alright, so far, you might be thinking to yourself that these comments aren't anything unusual, because everything that McCormack was saying about his team's performance was true. They lost the game by 3 scores in front of their home fans because they didn't play well. And McCormack was saying in the press conference how in just about every facet of the game, the Eagles did not play well. Nothing to write home about. However, in the middle of all of that, and in the middle of talking about how poor his team was, and how much better the Falcons were on this day, he added something that was a bit insane considering the circumstances. Because when talking about the game, McCormack said, "I don't believe that Atlanta is a 44-27 better team than we are. We scared them to death in a lot of areas." Seriously, despite how poorly the Eagles played, in the eyes of Coach McCormack, for some reason, the Eagles apparently scared the Falcons to death. The Eagles apparently had the Falcons fearing that they were going to lose the game and that this wasn't going to be a good result for them. And the Eagles had the Falcons clenching and fighting for their lives. The Eagles had the Falcons scared to death. Because that makes sense. That makes complete sense. Now look, there are plenty of times where something like that absolutely applies, even if the final score might be a blowout. As an example, let's say you've got a classic case of a 1 seed going up against a 16 seed. The 16 seed is winning by 11 points at the halftime break, and they're up by double digits. However, coming out of the locker room, the number 1 seed goes on an 8-0 run, cuts into the deficit right away, and then just dominates in the second half and takes it by 20 points. There's usually one of those games every year. Yes, the game ended in a blowout, but you could absolutely say that there was a point where the number 16 seed gave the number 1 seed a good scare. Same thing in football. If you're watching as of this video, remember the Alabama-South Florida college game from last week? After 3 quarters, South Florida only trailed 14-13. The Bulls were giving the Crimson Tide a good scare. In the fourth, Alabama outscored South Florida 28-3 and won it 42-16, making the final score look like a one-sided affair thanks to 3 touchdowns in the final 6 minutes. But you can't deny that the Bulls gave the Crimson Tide a pretty good scare. So you get the idea. I don't have a problem, generally speaking, with coaches saying that they scare the opposition to death. But here, in this game, after everything you just said, the Eagles didn't lead outside of 7-0, and at no point were the Falcons on the ropes. The Falcons were in control for just about the entire thing. Even when you said in that quote that you were gaining momentum in the second quarter, the Falcons literally outscored you guys in the second quarter to the point where the Falcons were leading it at the halftime break. You lost by 17 points in a game where you never led outside of 7-0 and never looked all that threatening to begin with. And by your own admission, you talked about how just nothing went right for you. Just about nothing went right for you. You couldn't kick, you couldn't punt, you couldn't tackle, you couldn't stop the run, you couldn't win off the line, you weren't physical compared to the Falcons. You couldn't do a single thing right. And yet, you somehow gave the Falcons a scare and had them scared to death? How on earth does that make any sense? In what universe does that make sense? I genuinely can't follow your logic here. And of all the teams to say that about, you're going to say that about a team coached by Norm Van Brocklin? You're going to say that about a freaking Norm Van Brocklin-led team? You can learn more about Van Brocklin by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But if there is one thing you should know about him if you don't know already, while he was not a good coach at all, I can assure you, he got scared at absolutely nothing. He would willingly challenge anyone and everyone to a fight at any time at the drop of a hat. If you knew the man, you have at least one story of him being willing to fight, including the time that he literally challenged reporters to a fight in the middle of a press conference, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. If there's anyone that I can promise you would not be scared to death at anything, it's Norm Van Brocklin, let alone a game like this where his side was in complete control the entire way. The quote by McCormack never made any sense to begin with, but against that man in particular, yeah, it makes even less sense. Good job, Eagles. You really hired a good one to command your squad. As for what happened after the game between these teams behind me right here, for the Philadelphia Eagles, their season was just about over. They ended the year losing 3 of their final 5 games to end the season with a 5-8-1 record, which is not good by any means, but it was better than their abysmal campaign the previous year in 1972. As for Mike McCormack, well, he would coach the Eagles for 3 more seasons, 73, 74, and 75, And in his 3 seasons, he would win just 16 games, would never make the playoffs, and would never have a winning record. Eventually, the Eagles would get it right by hiring Dick Vermeil in 1976, but those teams in the early 70s and the late 60s were an absolute train wreck, and the Eagles could never seemingly get the right coach. They were absolutely horrible back then, and Mike McCormack's teams were definitely part of the problem. So here's a word to the wise. If you do something poorly, you admit to doing something poorly, and you openly acknowledge that the thing that you were trying to do kicked your butt, it's probably not the best idea to say that you should have had it. If you're going up against someone and they thoroughly destroy you in just about every facet, if you then say, I definitely gave them a good scare, odds are, number 1, no you didn't, and number 2, they won't feel the same way. I can assure you, they won't feel the same way at all. There's optimism, and then there's delusion. And whatever Mike McCormack said after this game was definitely on the side of delusion. I know that much. Because in 1973, when it came to their game against the Falcons, the Eagles' performance and subsequent statements afterwards by their head coach could be summed up by the classic song lyrics in their fight song. Die, Eagles, die, on the road to lunacy. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.